Welcome back. With this video, we have reached the next large chapter, namely Chapter 3, Horror in Japanese Cinema. Some of the main questions for this entire segment will be, what kind of horror elements can we find within the history and evolution of Japanese cinema? What elements from literature were picked up again by Japanese filmmakers? And what new elements developed from this medium? This short video only serves as a tiny introduction before we will properly start in the next one. And as a part of this introduction, how about we take a brief look at 3.1, the first steps of Japanese cinema. So, the beginning of cinema in Japan can be traced back to the end of the 19th century. At the end of 1896, Edison's kinetoscope was publicly demonstrated for the first time in Japan in the city of Kobe. Then, the next year, at the beginning of 1897, the Lumiere brothers' cinematograph was demonstrated in Osaka. The exact date of the first films that were produced directly in Japan seems to be a bit difficult to pinpoint, but here's what I found. First of all, in these cases when I say films, I'm not talking about complex movie productions yet like the ones that we know today, but rather short recordings instead, very brief clips or short films basically. And some sources I discovered state that 1899 marks the year in which the first films were produced in Japan by recording performances such as kabuki theater or geisha dances and then showing them to a wider audience. However, I also found sources which state that what actually happened in 1899 was the first public screening of Japan-made films, while the very first films had already been produced in late 1897 and 1898, so 1 to 2 years earlier. According to these sources, the recording from late 1897 showed sights of Tokyo, while the films from 1898 were apparently horror-related short films called Bakejizo and Shinin no Sose, which roughly translate to Haunted Monk Statue and Corpse Revival. These short films do not exist anymore though, and are only mentioned in the recollections of a cameraman called Asano Shiro. Still, if we can trust those recollections, then it's kind of fascinating to think that some of the first recordings made in Japan that were created with the intention of telling a story to an audience, albeit a very simple and short one in these cases, were directly related to the world of horror. A certain film historian by the name of Uchiyama Kazuki wrote in an article on Japanese cinema that cinema lends itself particularly well to supernatural stories, since the act of people sitting together in darkness to follow a story was reminiscent of the times when ancient people gathered around a fire in the evening to listen to supernatural tales. Perhaps he was right. Speaking of Uchiyama Kazuki, back when I wrote my graduation thesis, most of the info on the beginnings of Japanese cinema came from the Japanese book Kaiki to Genso e no Kairo that he had published in 2008. But while double-checking some dates, I also found the above-mentioned other dates and some very interesting websites with a lot more info on the subject of Japanese cinema's beginnings. I will put these into the video description, so if you're interested in a much more detailed look at this topic, then I can highly recommend you take a look at those pages. And with that, I will already conclude this very short introduction to our new large chapter, and in the next video, we will properly kick it off by taking a closer look at some of the first developments within early Japanese horror films, as well as some of the first film studios and their activities with regards to horror films. I hope to see you there, and as always, take care and goodbye.